G'day, my name's Ebony Bennett. I'm Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and welcome to our Economics of a Pandemic webinar series. I can see our participants streaming through the door, so to speak. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I live and work. I live in Ngunnawal country here in Canberra. It's a bracing, I think, about 9 degrees today and lovely here. I would like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded here and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us on the webinar here today. During the pandemic, the Australia Institute is aiming to do these webinars at least weekly, but the days and times do vary, like today. And so if you want to check out our future webinars and register, make sure you head on over to tai.org.au/webinars so you don't miss out. And just a few tips before we begin to help things run smoothly. If you hover over the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a Q&A function where you can type in questions for our panelists, and you should also be able to upvote questions from other people and make comments as well. Please keep things civil in the chat or we'll boot you out. And finally, just a reminder that this discussion is being recorded and we'll make a video available on our website after we've finished here today. And now I'm going to pass over to Richie Merzian, the Director of our Climate and Energy Program at the Australia Institute, to set the scene for the Australian electric vehicle market and introduce our guests today. Thanks, Richie.
Thanks, Ebony. It's been 18 months since an Australian Senate committee released its report around the state of electric vehicles in this country. And it found that Australia will be left behind unless there's strong policy direction from the federal government. Unfortunately, that hasn't been forthcoming. A national electric vehicle policy was promised to be delivered by the end of last year, but then that was delayed to mid this year, and then again delayed to the end of this year. If you actually go to the federal government's electric vehicle policy page on the Department of Industry, you get an error warning. That's the state of electric vehicles at the national level right now, and it explains why electric vehicles make up less than 1% of our car fleet. It explains why Australia has the worst fuel efficiency standards in the OECD. There are so many reasons for Australia to transition to electric mobility for our transport sector. There's the fuel savings, there's fuel security. Australia imports 90% of its liquid fuels, and so is incredibly fuel insecure. And moving to electric would help correct this. There's the opportunities around manufacturing, about integrating the value chain here in Australia, given Australia is the largest exporter of lithium, a key component for the batteries for electric vehicles. And for those who watched Fight for Planet A, Craig Rucastle's show on ABC this week, it showed that electric vehicles can outcompete even the best roadsters, the best petrol guzzlers that Australia has been well known to produce in the past. So electric vehicles have managed to outperform in many different respects. And a recent report by the Australian Electric Vehicle Council shows that policies to support electric vehicle uptake are quite popular. So really, it leaves us scratching our heads as to what we can do and how Australia can actually improve the situation. And so we're looking further afield, and that's where our gaze turns to Norway. By contrast, I think 50% of new car sales are electric. When you add hybrids to that, it becomes 70% in Norway. So you have the highest penetration per capita for electric vehicles. And this is in big part thanks to government policy to incentivize electric vehicle uptake. With us here today to help explain and explore that, we have a guest from Oslo who's tuning in early in the morning. Christina, who I'll introduce in a moment, is the head of the Norwegian Electric Vehicle Association, which I won't pronounce its Norwegian name because I'll screw it up, and I'll let Christina do that. But this EV association is the largest EV association in the world, and it has 4 key pillars: to reduce emissions on the road, to represent the interests of electric vehicle owners, to inform and influence government policy, and to improve the uptake of electric vehicle infrastructure. And it has, I think, 75,000 members and counting. And so it has the numbers behind it to actually make a lot of these things happen. So I would like to now introduce the head, Christina Bu, who has been leading this organization for 5 years. She holds degrees in political science, as well as a master's in society, science and technology from the University of Oslo in Maastricht. And she has become a global voice for electric vehicle uptake, not just in Norway and on the European continent, but has been speaking across the world. And we're very lucky to have her here. To complement that, we have one of Australia's best known voices promoting electric vehicles, which is Giles Parkinson. Who manages the website RenewEconomy and is probably best known through that particular portal, championing the transition in the electricity sector. But more recently, he's built a website for all things electric vehicles, The Driven, and he has a long history in Australian journalism and as a key voice in the transition for climate solutions. So with that, I might give Christina first and then Giles second an opportunity to provide introductory comments, and then we'll just go to questions. Christina.
Thank you, Richie. Very nice to be in Australia in the morning, but it's, I think actually it's warmer in Oslo right now. We are in the end of summer and had some really nice and sunny days. I have been following Australia with a bit of interest because I find a lot of the debates there a little bit strange in a way, and I really hope that this will change in the coming years, because I think in a way you are discussing things that we sort of look at as myths here now, and which was definitely part of the debate quite a few years ago in Norway and even in Europe, but that we sort of stopped discussing at this moment, when you see what is going on with the technology and everything. But I want to share some slides with you just as an introduction. Let's see if I can do that. Is that visible?
Yeah.
Okay, so Norway is a very small country. We are a bit more than 5 million people, have about 2.7 million passenger cars, and we just passed 300,000 fully electric cars on the road. You see on this graph the rising numbers, and we've also seen, of course, that is going a bit slow, because you have to have higher and higher market shares every year to actually get a decent number of cars on the road. The change really started, well, 2010-11, we started getting more and more electric cars, because before that there was not really many to buy. The policies that we have in Norway has actually been in place for a long time, since the early 1990s. But I saw someone writing that they had a Nissan Leaf. The Nissan Leaf was introduced end of 2011, and then we got the Tesla, and more different models were introduced, and the sales started really growing. So yeah, as Richie said, the first half year of this year, we had a market share of new vehicle sales, passenger cars, that was almost 50%. And a bit lower when it comes to light duty vehicles. So currently 10% of all passenger cars in Norway are fully electric. In Oslo, in the second biggest city, Bergen, it's about 20%. So these cars are very visible if you visit Norway, and it's starting to sort of become more the normal. So here you see the market shares first half year this year, and as you can see, it's about 70% if we include the plug-in hybrids as well. Diesel is down a lot. In 2010-11, it was 75% of new vehicle sales. This is driven by policies, and we have a parliament that has decided on a pretty ambitious goal, and it's voted over by all political parties is behind this goal. And it says that from 2025 or in 2025, all new vehicle sales, both passenger cars and light duty vehicles, should be zero emission when it comes to driving in the car. Of course, there are emissions when it comes to manufacturing it. So that means from 2025, we're not going to have plug-in hybrids either. We're only going to sell, all the new cars that we're selling should be either full electric or hydrogen. But as we see it now, it's mostly electric cars that will take this market. So we have to move with passenger cars from about 50% to 100% in less than 5 years. It's ambitious, but it's absolutely possible. So, and I heard that one of the discussions in Australia was that, well, electric cars cannot work here because we have to, you know, have a tow, do you call it tow bar or tow hitch? And it's big cars and so on. So I just thought I'd share a very short video that my colleague recorded this summer because he went on a vacation in Norway. I don't know if you know Norway very well, but Norway is not the easiest country to make transport electric. It's a long country. It's actually, if you would pull it around or sort of twist it around, it would actually reach down to Rome. It's a lot of mountains and it's really cold winters, which obviously affect the range of the cars. So I would just tell skeptics in Australia that, okay, you have a bigger country, but still, if Norway can do it, you can do it too. So just we'll share this video with you, a few seconds. Okay, is it not working? So he drove more than 2,000 kilometers this summer. Because of COVID-19, we actually had a record, well, actually 1 out of 2 EV drivers stated that they would go on holiday with their electric car. And we were a bit scared that this would be a bit of a challenge when it comes to the fast charging infrastructure that we have. And there were quite a bit of queues, but it went more or less okay, I think. And that is probably one of the biggest challenges going forward, that we need a lot of more chargers or fast charging infrastructure. But I'm sure we will come back to that topic, and that was just an introduction from my side. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Christina. Giles, I think we come to you next. Where did you want to pick up after that fabulous introduction from Christina? There's quite a different picture here in Australia.
Gosh, such a very, very different picture. It's just extraordinary. That video, that presentation from Christina was pretty much a repudiation of everything that we've ever been told by the Australian government, I think. In particular, that little video with the towing the caravans and things like that. I saw one little comment in the chat come up and said, also show that to ScoMo. I don't think the word ScoMo was actually used, it was something similar, but and I think it's true. And just the fact that they've got to 50%, I mean, you actually look at that chart, incredible chart about the growth. We're back in 2012 or maybe even 2011, I couldn't quite tell where Norway was, and they've already gotten to 50% electric vehicles with a decent policy and no real fuss. And I find that extraordinary. We've just been fed a whole lot of misinformation, which I think has been you know, really, really unfortunate. Richie, you sort of pointed out at the start that you try and go to the policy page of the Australian government and it says, you know, error, it's got an error message. Well, I don't know whether that's actually sort of really sort of, you know, should be more dismayed or maybe slightly encouraged that actually sort of suggested that by omission it's an error. One thing I can say, look, we've had a really low take-up of electric vehicles in Australia so far, but we have had some take-up. And I think there's an extraordinary amount of interest. I think all the anecdotes, the people I talk to, and even some surveys by Roy Morgan, by the NRMA, by the Electric Vehicle Council, point to the amount of interest that there is. I think in various studies, more than half the people say that their next vehicle purchase will be an electric car. Now, they do have to wait until there's one that suits their lifestyle and suits their budget. And I guess a lot of people, those don't exist anymore. But I just think there's a huge amount of interest. And I just see that with the Driven. So we set up the Driven 2 years ago because we could see on RenewEconomy the interest in electric vehicle stories. And remarkably, we're getting pretty close to 1 million page views and 1/3 350,000 unique visitors a month in a country, from a country which only has 6,000 or 7,000 electric vehicle drivers. I mean, this month, I mean, it might even actually overtake RenewEconomy in terms of sort of visitor numbers and page views. And that just shows, I think, the interest that is out there. And I can tell, I've got an electric car, I'm lucky enough to have one, and I drive around, and I go down to the beach and have a surf, and people gather around and they talk and they ask questions. And I just think that's one of the most important things. That's why this webinar is great, because there's so many questions about there. There's a lot of interest. People don't have much understanding. People are really curious. Some people are dismissive. I was told yesterday morning that a Tesla is just a, what was it? An electromagnetic radiation death box, but, which was pretty interesting. Anyway, some people have certain views, but look, there's a lot of genuine interest out there. And I think, if anything, that the government, well, it should have a policy, but it should have a view not to misinform, but to actually encourage information. So look, well done for putting on this webinar, and I look forward to the answering the questions.
Excellent. Well, I can report that we do have 691 people on this webinar with us today. So like Giles said, there's a huge amount of interest in electric vehicles here in Australia. And thanks to everyone who's joining us from right across the country, all the way from down in Tassie, up north to Queensland, and across from WA. I've got interest from all over the place. Christina, I might come back to you now. I wanted to ask, you talked about the growth in the market that there has been in Norway, but what are the really specific policies that have been enacted in Norway that really encourage that uptake, apart from setting that overall long-term goal for, well, not long-term, by 2025? What are the policies that really encourage the uptake, or that you think worked the best?
Okay, so we have to go back in time a little bit. Norway has really never had any car manufacturing apart from some parts and stuff. And before the oil, Norway was a bit of a poor country, really, or not poorer than the rest of Europe, but it was, cars were looked at something like a luxury good, and was taxed quite heavily early on. So for many years, Norway has been a country with very high purchase taxes. So it's a tax on buying a car in addition to VAT, which is 25% in Norway. So buying a new car is expensive. And in 2007, they introduced in this purchase tax a CO2 tax. So already then, it was not just all about electric cars, but also to sort of make consumers make the right choice and choose the cars that have lower emissions than other cars, to put it that way. But Norway had a small electric car production going on, actually. Some of you might have heard about Think and Buddy, which were small Norwegian cars manufactured here. Think was actually at one point even bought by Ford, but then put to death when California decided, well, it was because of California's new laws that were then changed. Anyway, the start of the incentives, which was really removing the purchase tax and the VAT on full electric cars, was also a little bit to help this small industry, but from the beginning also had a lot to do with environmental issues. So, and by around 2010, Think was finally bankrupt, and from then on, it has all to do with reducing CO2 emissions, but also, of course, local emissions as well. And Norway already have 100% renewable energy production when it comes to, you know, the energy we use. We have 98% hydropower, but also a bit of wind and solar. We're going to be have a surplus pretty soon. So we're actually exporting renewable power to our neighboring or to Europe. And for Norway to reduce the CO2 emissions that we are obliged to we have the same goals as the European Union. We have to tackle transport because we don't have a coal plant to shut down. So we have to tackle transport, and this is the reason why electrification of the transport sector is very important. But back in the 1990s, when we started with these incentives, none of the politicians or anyone thought that we would be sort of the EV star of the future. There were no big master plan behind this. And I think everyone was a bit taken by surprise about when this change started with cars coming in and the market share started rising in the 2010-11. In 2012, the market share was already 3%, which is more than most other countries in the world today. And then our association started growing stronger, and there were also more incentives put in place. So we have the most important is, as I said, is that we tax what we don't want. That means polluting cars, and we promote what we want. Because consumers, as Giles was saying, they are very interested, and the problem in most countries is that buying the electric option is so much more expensive than the ICE car that you end up buying. So what Norway has done is really just leveling out the price by taxing ICE cars and not taxing fully electric cars. So that is really the main basis. But on top of that, there's quite a few local incentives as well. Like, for example, we have tolls. Many of the bigger cities have tolls coming into the city, or also the main highways to finance the roads. EVs for quite some years didn't have to pay tolls at all. Now it's maximum 50%. The same with public parking, taking the car on the ferry. We also have had access to bus lanes coming into cities, especially in Oslo. That has been an important, especially at the beginning. So incentives like that. And then gradually, because people need some time to understand and learn, like Giles was saying too, it takes some time. And you need also time to make this sort of movement happen. But what we see is that we get a very strong neighbor effect when it comes to electric cars. People hear that their neighbor or a friend, someone drive an EV, and they actually go into the shop and say, hey, I'm going to have an electric car. And it's actually, that's how it happens. It just sort of moves on. And of course, with the infrastructure and everything, it's a lot of challenges with electrifying transport. And it is challenging, but everyone in Norway is really, I think, very surprised about how fast it can actually happen. And I think that this transition can happen much faster in Australia and other markets, because we started with cars that were a bit crap, to put it to be true, with low range. We didn't have infrastructure. Everything, all the technology was still very immature, not mature. Now the cars that are being launched today are really good, long range, faster charging, and there's many more options. And the next few years, we're going to have so many new electric cars on the market. Of course, they are first routed to the countries that are putting some measures in place. Norway is, as I said, a very small country, but we are very popular with the car manufacturers. We've had lots of cars being launched here the last 10 years, which is really weird. Why would you launch a car in a country with 5.2 million people? but we are certainly, you know, the hot spot for EVs, and a lot of car manufacturers are coming here to learn and to understand, because they look at Norway as sort of tomorrow's car market globally.
I might pick up on that point that you've made there about Norway being a small country. Giles, Australia is obviously a massive country, but couldn't be more of a huge contrast with the types of policies that we're seeing out of Norway. If we look back to the last federal election, the coalition government was really put out quite a scare campaign around electric vehicles. We heard that they were going to kill the weekend, that they were going to destroy the ute, that you couldn't tow trailers, that type of thing. How much do you think those types of campaigns, run from, you know, the very most senior levels of government, has an effect on the Australian public and their perception of electric vehicles?
Well, I think it has an enormous effect because a lot of those views were echoed without question in the media, and the media here in Australia is dominated by the Murdoch media, and they're only too happy to run scare stories about electric vehicles in the same way they've written scare stories about climate change and renewables over the last decade or two. More to the point, I think it actually sends, well, not more to the point, I mean, but equally, I think it actually sends a really bad message to the global car manufacturers. And we've seen cases already in Australia where we just do not get the models in Australia, which are available even in New Zealand, for instance. They've got the Kia Niro, they've had the Audi e-tron for almost a year now, they've got the VW e-Golf, they've got a bunch of vehicles which are not brought to Australia simply because those companies have decided it's just too hard. Or they might bring one version of their model and not the long version of their model. For instance, the Nissan Leaf. The new Nissan Leaf is great. It's much longer range than the first one, but we're not getting the extra long range with the bigger battery as yet. And I did see one question there about what can people do to try and change that. Well, one of the things you can do is possibly go into a dealership in Australia and have a look around and just sort of say, well, no, I actually want you to present me with a decent offering of electric vehicles, and actually put pressure on those companies to do so. But I think as long as you have a government that the industry thinks is against them, doesn't appreciate, doesn't actually want their product, then it's actually very hard to get people to actually come past that, because it is a small market, in the sense that, you know, it's maybe 1 million cars a year, although that's falling down quite dramatically because people are just not buying petrol and diesel cars anymore. They're waiting for the electric vehicle, but it's still a big enough market. We did have 3 manufacturers here. We kind of missed the opportunity to change over. We must make it a vibrant market because, as Richie said right at the start, there are so many reasons why we should do it.
Christina, for those of us who are here in Australia, I wonder if you can give us a bit of a sense of what it's to live in a nation with the highest electric vehicle penetration per capita. I imagine that the electric vehicle charging stations are pretty common. Are the roads quieter? Is traffic quieter? What are the kinds of things that we can expect if we electrify our vehicle fleet here?
Well, it's, as I said, it's 10% of the passenger cars. So the change isn't, you know, that big yet. And that's the thing. It takes time to change a whole fleet, and it's going to take ages before we have only electric cars on the road. That's why it's so important to get to 100% market share as fast as possible, because every new ICE car that you buy today, at least in Norway, it's going to pollute for 18 years, because that's how long in average they're on the road. And well, but I think yeah, it's a lot of attention in the media. EVs sells now, and it's a lot of attention. All the major medias, many of them have their own EV pages, for example, and a lot of tests. Oh no, it's the new cars coming. Everybody knows about, for example, I know you might have heard about the Polestar 2, the sort of Volvo electric car that is owned by Geely, a Chinese company. Polestar put up their first sort of space here in Oslo, the first one in the world. They have like long lists with people that have ordered this car. A lot of attention, a lot of interest, more and more knowledge about it in the general public as well. The challenge is, of course, charging. We currently have close to 3,000 fast charging stations, which means not stations, but fast chargers. One station can have several fast chargers. Or I don't, do you call it fast chargers in Australia, or
yep.
rapid chargers, or? Yeah.
Fast chargers and ultra fast chargers and things like that.
Yeah, fast and ultra fast. Yeah. So we have almost 3,000 fast and ultra fast. More and more ultra fasts also. We call it. It's from 50 kilowatt. It's fast, and from 150 ultra fast. We have already about 7 or 8 different companies offering fast charging, putting fast chargers up and offering this as a service. And of course, in the beginning, when there are few cars on the road, it's a bit of a chicken and egg challenge when it comes to charging. But now, and we had some governmental support for putting up infrastructure right at the beginning. But today, it's because we have so many cars on the road. There's a lot of new chargers being put up every week really now, and it's done with private money, it's investments, and that is, I think, an important message, because this is discussed a lot in other countries, that it's so expensive going to build this infrastructure and there's no money in it. No, there's no money in it in the beginning, but when the market is there, it's happening. Yeah, but quieter definitely, and in the city of Oslo, it's not just about cars and electrified cars, but it's also has a lot of focus on public transport, walking, biking. The point is not having more cars on the road, it's just that the cars that we have should be electric. But I think the most interesting thing that we are starting to see now is, as I said, 10% of passenger cars are full electric, and the last 3 years, we're starting to see this influencing the sales of fuels. And the last 3 years, it's actually down 10% in Norway. And most of you probably know that Norway is also an oil-producing country. We are as bad as Australia.
Australia is actually still worse. Don't worry.
I'm not sure, but we are producing oil, and the politicians here are also understanding that this oil age will end, and it's better to sort of be in front of that change and trying to sort of because it's such a big part of our economy. It's better to start now the transition to a zero emission society, and yeah, we're already on our way here with not using fuels here. And it's not just cars, by the way, I'll just add that as well. We already have several big fully electric car ferries in this country. By the end of 2021, we will have more than 60 of them, because we have a lot of fjords, especially on the west coast, but also here in Oslo, the ferries are fully electric. We are also more and more focusing on the heavier transport, getting more electric options there. And also Avinor, which is the Norwegian airport operator, they have ambitious goals when it comes to the aviation here inland, because we have a lot of because the country is a little bit rugged, and especially further north, there are a lot of shorter sort of flights that people do that can be operated by full electric planes. So I've even been in a full electric plane 1.5 years ago. It was an amazing experience. So it's just a bit mind-blowing how fast this transition is happening.
Well, from fast to slow, Richie, we're still waiting on the electric vehicle strategy from the Australian government due later this year. What are we expecting out of that, and what's something that you would like to see in that?
Yeah, well, look, I think we're being relatively modest in our expectations. Just a strategy would be good. Look, a number of policies were suggested by the Senate committee last year around changing the taxation of electric vehicles, to decreasing the GST, which is the equivalent of the value-added tax in Norway that you'd have on the purchase, giving incentives like using bus lanes, like having free charging. It's a whole sort of variety of ways. Not much is expected out of this one, simply because this doesn't seem like a government that wants to incentivize electric vehicles transitioning over. But at the same time, I think the opportunity is really at the subnational level. I think Norway has two levels of government, federal and then local. In Australia, we have one in the middle, and that's where we're seeing most of the action. So I think in the short term, we can probably expect more things out of that state level incentivization. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, with enough pressure and with enough demand, we will start seeing more action at the federal level.
Thanks, Richie. We're going to go to questions from the audience now. The first one's for you, Christina. It's from Gordon Churchman, and he asks, how does Norway deal with the need to dispose of old petrol-driven cars when people make the switch, and does government play a role in that?
Yeah, we have pretty good systems for that. You actually have to pay a sort of a scrappage fee whenever you buy a car, and it's sort of this, when you scrap your car at the end of life, you get some money back to deliver it in. We also have very good systems now for handling batteries. That's also something that is discussed a lot, and this is becoming a bit of an industry because there's a lot of value in the batteries that are in the cars today, and can be recycled. And we're also getting industries in Norway now within battery manufacturing, actually. So yeah, so cars are handled. They're a very high recycling rate on cars in general, and it's also now we're really working on that with batteries as well. And we already have battery manufacturing because of our maritime sector, but it's also now a lot more happening within batteries in general. And I think that is something that was also discussed in Norway a few years ago. Why should we promote EVs? Because we don't have any industry in connection to this. But now we see that being at the forefront also means that there are new opportunities emerging. And with Australia having lots of lithium and all of those things, I mean, there's great opportunities for Australia in this area. And for many years, Europe and the rest of the world have let China sort of be at the forefront with controlling really a lot of the industry in connection to battery manufacturing, for example. Europe has been very slow, and now they have a strategy to sort of make batteries in Europe, and it's happening a lot more now. But that's also a message for Australia. You have to sort of jump on the bandwagon now and be part.
Yeah, that brings me to the next question, which is from Robin Gardner, and this one perhaps might be for you, Giles and Richie. How can we encourage the use and manufacture of electric buses, electric vehicles and light commercial vehicles in Australia? I guess I wanted to pick up there on the idea of, we used to have a car manufacturing industry and don't anymore, but there's a lot of renewed focus, particularly with the pandemic, on manufacturing and our capabilities there. Giles, do you think we'll head in that direction?
Well, let's hope so. We've actually got a couple of bus makers in Australia who are making electric buses, but the take-up has been slow, and I guess that's actually probably a state government problem. WA, for instance, just put out a mandate for 900 new diesel buses over the next decade, and that was just a year ago. Which is ridiculous. They've tried to catch up some ground by saying we're going to trial 2 electric buses on a 3-kilometre route. They're really worried about that. And they're going to do that in 2 years' time. Now, there's 500,000 electric buses that exist in the world. A lot of them in China, but a lot of them in other cities in Latin America, in Europe. So this idea that we sort of should trial it on a 3-kilometre route just to make sure that we don't run out of power and things like that, they really just need a bit of a change in the mindset of these state bureaucracies and things like that. And look, Queensland and New South Wales are both doing trials. The ACT is doing one too, but we could go so much faster. So we have been whinging about the federal government not doing much. I think there's a lot that the state government can do. The ACT so far for light vehicles is the only one that gets drop stamp duty for new electric vehicles. So I think all the other state governments should follow that. Some of them are investing a reasonable amount in charging infrastructure, they have to do more, particularly if you're going to have buses and like commercial vehicles. And the other thing they need to do is to more quickly transition their government fleets to electric vehicles. So there's plenty that they can do.
Most people actually say that with city buses, it's already it saves money already to jump to electric. And I mean, Santiago, Chile bought 100 electric buses last year, and we have lots of them in Oslo already. And it's more expensive to buy them, but it saves so much money when it comes to fuel costs. So it's already a given, really.
I bet.
That's actually that's actually true of all car fleets. So if you think about government fleets and private fleets, they tend to buy a car for 3 or 4 years. And there was a study done by ClimateWorks last year, which shows that for fleet owners on a 4-year novated lease, electric vehicles, even in Australia, where they are rare and expensive, deliver significant savings. So that's the opportunity. And I think in the background, I think some of those fleet owners are starting to think about this, but they're, the government could make that happen so much easier. And that was actually the target of the Labor policy proposal, was fleets. And it made sense. It was a bit of a no-brainer, really.
Well, that was the same policy that was going to kill the weekend, though, Giles.
It sure was.
I know. But I've got an electric vehicle and my weekend still lives on. And,
it's worth just adding one more thing, which often gets raised in Australia. Because Australia still runs most of its electricity off coal and gas, some people complain that just plugging an electric vehicle into the grid here is no better than running an internal combustion engine, an ICE vehicle. But according to our research and many others, it's just not true. Even in the dirtiest corner of our electricity grid down in Victoria, which runs on brown coal for the most part, it would still save emissions to plug an electric vehicle into that grid than to run an internal combustion engine one. So on the emission side, it's definitely a winner as well.
And I will just add to that, the Australia Institute Centre for Future Work has done a lot of work looking at Australia's lithium deposits, and if we value added onto that, the processing of the lithium, turning it into batteries and eventually into an electric vehicle, we're missing out on a huge amount of output that we can gain just from value adding to the lithium that we already have here, that obviously we're not doing. The next question is from David Jones, who asks, Christina, has Norway evolved its consumer laws to address specific issues relevant to electric cars, like battery replacement? You were talking about the fee that you pay there, but is there anything else that comes up with ownership of an electric vehicle that's meant you've had to change consumer or other laws to deal with it?
Not really, but we do have a discussion. Well, we've been working together with the Car Importer Association here, because there's a bit of a challenge with the lack of laws when it comes to batteries in general. We have had examples of people, because batteries is quite a big value. So who owns the battery if a car crash, for example? And we don't want a situation where people can just buy a used battery online, for example. And because to handle a battery, you have to be very careful and know what you're doing. And of course, this can be when it comes to, for example, people having solar panels. They could like to have a battery to store energy or something like that. So we want a little bit stricter, some laws to regulate this. And this is something we're trying to sort of work with the governmental bodies now, together with the Car Importer Association, to sort of get this sort of regulated. When it comes to battery swapping, that is something that a lot of people are asking about. We've sold, of course, a lot of cars with low range at the beginning, and now if the capacity is down maybe 85-90% or lower, people with and the car is still fine, maybe you would like to change it. I think that this is really the key here, is really the car manufacturers, and they are not interested, I think, to make this happen make this a bit of a system. So I think other players would have to sort of do it. It is possible, not very easy and not cheap either. But I think this is something that in eventually have to be put in a system, really, I think, because there's no point not being able to doing it. But yeah, and I think just the whole battery thing is just a big opportunity going forward, and it's going to be interesting to see whether the car manufacturers will be trying systems where they own the battery and want it back when the car is scrapped, or who sort of is the owner of it, because it's a lot of value, especially when the volumes come up.
Yeah, that brings me to my next question, which is about, I think it's called the Good Car Company, organisations that are organising to import secondhand electric vehicles from overseas markets into Australia. Giles, do you know much about that, or Richie?
I was actually talking to Anthony from the Good Car Company the other day, actually. He's got a fantastic little business model. Anthony and his partners have been involved in renewable energy at a community level over the last decade and done lots of good things. And they just saw the opportunity and the need for electric vehicles. And their business model is based on, because one of the legacies of Australia's car manufacturing industry and all the protection that was around it. And it's very hard to import cars if it's not imported by the manufacturer. So what they're trying to do is to set up systems to import second-hand vehicles from Japan. In New Zealand, that actually accounts for 50% of all electric vehicle sales, and it's mostly second-hand Nissan Leafs. But he and others are also looking to import models which companies wouldn't otherwise do. So, for instance, I mentioned the Nissan Leaf beforehand, the longer range. The rules are very strict about imports, but the RMA actually did a paper just recently suggesting that the rules should be relaxed in the way they could be relaxed, which would allow other companies to come in and put their hand up and sort of say, we'd like to import that. And I think there's a really good market out there because not everyone can afford a new electric vehicle. So bringing in some imports, and I know some people who have imported second-hand Leafs and they're extremely happy with them. So perhaps that can, and just to bring in new, a greater range of new models.
Yeah, I'd certainly probably couldn't afford a new one, but I'd love a second-hand electric vehicle. I'm hoping by the time I need my next car, there'll be a big market here for them. The next question, again, is for you, Christina. It's from Simon Holmescourt. He asks, one of the objections to removing taxes on electric vehicles is that it reduces taxes from those who can afford electric vehicles, thereby shifting the tax burden to those on lower incomes. Was this argument used against electric vehicles in Norway, and how was that overcome?
It's just definitely been on the table, and I know it's discussed a lot in Europe too. I often find that argument a little bit silly because you can't start electrifying the second-hand cars. You sort of have to start on the new cars. And in general, who buys the new cars? In Norway, 3 out of 4 cars that are sold yearly is second-hand. Most people buy second-hand cars. And the ones who buy new cars are companies and people with a certain amount of money. That's just how it is. But you need measures to make them also make the right choice, because if they choose an ICE car, the rest of us will be left in the second-hand market with ICE cars as well. So you have to start on the new cars, and well, the solution is tax the ICE cars more than put more taxes on the ICE cars and don't tax the electric cars. And the people that can afford new cars will have to pay either a tax or no tax. And I know that it's not easy for a country that haven't really had much purchase taxes to do what Norway is doing. Few countries in the world have that high taxes, purchase taxes, but there are more and more examples of countries introducing a so-called, it's a French sort of expression, bonus malus systems, which means France have done it, and 1.5 years or 2 years ago, Sweden did it as well. Sweden have never had taxes on the purchase of cars because they've had the manufacturing of Volvo and Saab. So they, 1st of July 2018, they introduced a bonus malus system, meaning they start taxing the most polluting cars, only the most polluting on purchase, use that money to subsidize zero and low emission cars. And they're already discussing they started on a low level, but they're now already discussing to sort of put more taxes on the most polluting and go like this. So that's the way to do it. And today in Norway, we are getting a growing second-hand market for EVs, and it's one of the most sought after cars on our sort of online marketplace. And we also see that more of the newer EVs also are more recently priced, and people also calculate that they save money on fuels and on tolls and those things. So it's not just rich people, definitely not just rich people driving EVs. It's becoming also more and more normal for, you know, my niece is 18, just bought a second-hand Leaf, for example. So
I was going to say, I guess that's where a strong second-hand EV market would come in for most people, but you probably you need the new cars to get the second-hand market, although we have just heard about that good car company importing them. The next question is from Graham Wood, who's going back to a discussion we kind of touched on earlier, that the federal government's really been dragging its feet here. So what can more progressive state governments be doing to get around that? So we talked a little bit about fleets, but Richie or Giles, what are the other mechanisms available to state governments to accelerate this process? Richie, do you want to start?
Sure. We're fortunate to be, Ebony and I, in the Australian Capital Territory, which probably has the most forward-leaning. So it completely waives the stamp duty on new electric vehicle purchases. And that's part of the concept that Christina was talking about, which is trying to even up the point of purchase price, which is where a lot of people make that decision about whether they're going to buy a car or not. It's not over how much money it'll cost over its lifetime, but more how much it'll cost up front. So evening it up by getting rid of the GST is a good amount. And then they've also reduced the amount you'd pay on registration as well going forward in the ACT in terms of running that. Having free charging stations around the cities and main points of place would also really help too, which means that you run it for free. And also like bringing in more electric vehicles into that market. So purchasing state government fleets or territory government fleets, mandating electric vehicle charging stations in public locations, in changing building codes or development applications, mandating that there's electric vehicle charging locations as well, so that they're regularly seen and people have that confidence, and you sort of reduce that range anxiety, whether it's real or not, to actually drive it. So there's a fair few things that states and territory governments can do.
And Giles, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add just about the fleets. That's really important because we talked about the second-hand car market. And if half of all vehicle purchases are from fleet buyers, then in 3 or 4 years' time, those cars come back into the market as second-hand cars. And I think that'll really push things along. You'll also have the happy occasion of actually people would drive their vehicles for work and then come back and want them for their own private use. And at the moment, I think we've only got one minister in the whole of Australia, state, federal government, who actually has an electric vehicle. It's Matt Keane from New South Wales. He's got a Tesla Model 3. And he absolutely loves it. And I used to joke that to get the government to change its mind, you take a fleet of Teslas down to Parliament House in Canberra, get them all to sort of drive a car, go around the block, and maybe they might come back and change their mind. But that might just be too hard to do. The other thing is on the taxes. Christina talked about the high taxes in Norway. Well, if you think of Australia, we've got the GST, we've got the stamp duty, we've got the cost of shipping coming into the market, we've got luxury car tax, which also adds up. So I think there's a question up there from someone asking why Teslas are so much more expensive in Australia than they are in the US. And that's it. There's about $25,000 worth of taxes that we slap on, if not more, for expensive vehicles. So there's a lot of things we can do to make those purchases more attractive.
Just on the luxury car tax as well. When the luxury car tax came in, there was an amendment made to make a fuel efficient version of the luxury car tax, so that more cars that were fuel efficient would be allowed in. That has since been eroded, the benefit there. So there's a lot of opportunity to reform federal taxes to incentivize this. And most of these taxes were brought in as protectionist measures to protect Holden and Ford in making these cars, and they no longer resonate in terms of the reason. So the opportunities are there. It just requires the political will.
Yeah, no car industry here to protect anymore, sadly.
Could also just add one thing, Ebony, if it's I think it's interesting also to understand the mechanisms behind discussions in Australia, in Europe, in other countries, in the US, that there are some really strong forces that want to sort of keep the status quo. They earn money on what is going on right now, and that is really important to understand, because and they're also, we've seen for example the Koch brothers in the US, the oil we know that they have been financing think tanks and a lot of anti-EV stuff. So this is going on, often not that visible, and I think that's probably also what's going on in Australia, that you have a big industry and a lot of people that wants to keep it the way it is, and that is something that's that's something that politicians should really try to pull, should try to sort of, they should look forward and understand that, just staying in the ice age is not going to be good for the future. Maybe in the short run, but not in the longer run.
Yeah, Richie and I spoke to the United Nations chief economist a week or so ago, and he said something very similar, I think, for the long term, not just for the short term. We might just have to wrap it up there, but before we go, I was just going to pick up on Giles' point there about how we convince the pollies by getting them all to drive a Tesla. I would also recommend, if people haven't watched Planet A on the ABC, the first episode featured Richie talking about the gas industry and what a poor investment that is in Australia at the moment. But also I noticed in one of the episodes, Craig Rucastle had test driven a Tesla, lined it up against Australia's fastest ICE car, and left it in the dust, and it looked like he had a ball driving it. So perhaps we need to get all our pollies out to Bathurst in a Tesla rather than driving around all the speed bumps and bollards up at Parliament House. It's not a very fun lap, and nowhere to do donuts at Parliament House, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Christina, Giles and Richie, for your time today. We really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who's attended today. I think we had north of 700 participants at one point. So as Giles said, clearly huge interest in electric vehicles in Australia. And thanks everyone for all your great questions. As always, I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Please join us over the next few weeks for more exciting webinars. Next week on Wednesday, the 26th of August at 11 a.m, we'll be talking to former Coalition Minister Andrew Robb about the pandemic and mental health and new and innovative approaches to problems like anxiety, depression, as well as addiction and PTSD. On Wednesday, the 2nd of September at 11 a.m, we'll be talking to the former president of Timor-Leste, Jose Ramos Horta, and former ACT Attorney General Bernard Collaery about East Timor oil and secret prosecutions. That's one not to miss. You can register for those webinars at our website, tai.org.au/webinars, and make sure you're subscribed to our podcast, Follow the Money. You can find that on iTunes or wherever you normally listen to a podcast. And in this week's episode, we talk about, basically how terrible the gas industry is and what a Santos Narrabri gas project is economically, environmentally, and if you're at all interested in creating jobs for the million unemployed people we have at the moment. So I encourage you to subscribe to that, and please stay 1.5 meters away, keep washing those hands, wear a mask out when you go outside, and stay safe, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks.